First and foremost, I would like to say thank you to you all massively for coming to, well, just being here and being part of our kind of grand experiment. We've never really done anything, that I'm aware of, we've never really done anything like this before in the UK comics scene. And I know it was a bit of the initial kind of cognitive dissonance when we were like, okay, we want to get a bunch of creators together in a room. And everyone's like, gotcha, it's a convention. Yeah, except there's no members of the public. And we're like, oh, okay. So we're selling to each other. I'm like, no, it's a bit like, it's like a convention, because you have to get up early, travel really far, but there's no kind of monetary incentive. And they're like, great, that's just what the UK comics industry needs. So
it's a convention.
Yeah.
I've got a suitcase of comics in my banner. Is it not a convention?
Oh no. So I guess just by way of introduction, I hope, the reason for trying to do this today was to give us a platform to come together and share some ideas, even just to have a moan if that's what we need as the UK industry, but maybe also to share some ideas and find ways of better doing the things we already do. Or if you're kind of starting out on the journey into comics, to hear from some people who are actually doing it, actually living the dream, as it were, of making comics, and to kind of say, what does that dream actually mean? When we talk about making it in comics, will we ever know if we've made it? And if we don't make it, if the current situation is as good as it's ever going to get, then how can we make our situation better? How can we just improve the way we do things? Because when I think of the UK comics industry, you guys are it. And that's maybe a rather terrifying mantle. So I can see Vince sinking his head into his hands at the back.
Vince has spent 2 years interviewing us. He knows what we are.
Yeah. The man who has all our dirty secrets is in the room here today. But it was this idea that when we go to a convention, when we go around the comic village, as has become the kind of accepted terminology for our community, I see so much amazing talent and enthusiasm. And it's not a question of, are the comics we're making good enough? Because I believe wholeheartedly they are. I don't think it's a question of good or bad or quality or otherwise. I think it's simply exposure. It's how do we get the word out about the stuff we do and the stuff we care about. And I think because we are always working so hard to follow our creative pathway, because we're all driven and creative and we're trying to make things we care about, that takes up a lot of our time, and we don't have a lot of energy outside of that to actually spend time thinking about how we could improve the businessy side of things, how we could actually improve our industry. When, for those of you who've been following the genesis of the summit, originally it was going to be part of an event in Birmingham. And when that event was, sadly cancelled, we had to look around for other venues. And somebody online popped up at the time and said, well, I think the reason the summit failed, even though it hadn't even happened yet, was because you didn't invite enough big names. And I was like, you're very much missing the point of what this event is trying to be. For me, and going to shows and stuff, the big names that I respect and admire are the people I see shows day in, day out, several times a year, multiple times a month even, getting up at 5 a.m, lugging their equipment from the cheapest hotel they could find to a table, setting up, you're exhausted, you're tired, and you spend 9 to 10 hours dealing with customers, all because you love what you do. And I think when I had to ask myself, who is this event going to be for? I think the 5 a.m. test was pretty much it. And if you've ever had to get up earlier than you knew existed, to then spend multiple hours doing something which is exhausting and tiring and stressful, and yet you keep doing it because you love it and you care about your art, then I think this is the event for you, I hope, he said. I'm ready to be proved wrong.
Hello. Now to ruin it.
But another thing that was very important to me, and I'm aware of the irony of having just spoken for 5 minutes, is that I didn't want this to be all about me. I very much wanted this to be about the wonderful creators who have very kindly offered their time and expertise to be here with us today.
Some of us half an hour ago.
Now, by way of introduction, I'm joined here for our first panel by Sarah Millman,
Hello.
who I'm pretty sure that all of you know in some capacity or
Dear, I
other.
apologise.
Sarah first kind of crossed my path several years ago when you were working on a comic called The Heart of Time,
Oh, yeah.
which I remember being absolutely charmed by. And now you've, since from as humble beginnings, kind of become this powerhouse in the UK comic scene.
Really?
This is all true. I wouldn't lie to you. Working on NPCT. Generally, I feel being an advocate for what comics can be.
Oh, thank you very much.
And just fighting the good fight day in, day out. In the middle is Gavin Mitchell. I mean, PJ Montgomery. Sadly, Gavin, seen here with his rather stern face, wasn't able to join us due to project clash. And PJ stepped in but 29 minutes ago to kind of save us and talk about his journey into comics.
John got me before I'd fully woken up.
I feel PJ is going to bring an interesting perspective to the panel, mostly because you are a writer.
Yeah, we're interesting.
We're interesting, can occasionally be interesting, yeah. And you're going to be sharing your story, which I believe covers everything from Welsh zombies to classical trolls and
It covers Gavin as well. So
and even Gavin. And finally, but by no means least, we have Shazleen, who's come all the way from London today to be with us, and who has some illustrious clients among her repertoire, including BBC, Time Out magazine. Am I missing any?
No, I think, and the aria. as well.
And the RAF, so no biggie. Yeah. And I think it's very important that I stop talking now and actually cede the floor to the people of interest. So, I guess kind of, Sarah,
Great.
if you'd like to, the whole point of this panel is to talk about my story and how you got into comics. Maybe you could tell us in your words how you got into comics or whatever that means.
But I hate that question though, because there's always people who come up to the table at conventions where I was like, how do I start making comics? And it's such a bizarre question to me, which sounds really weird. But it's just because I've always just thought you just make them.
That's the
Which
general
sounds-
consensus from most people, is it?
Yeah.
But I always just made some comics.
Yeah.
And that's the panel. Bye.
But I guess like when I started, I did the kind of traditional route of I studied film and then I dropped out after 2 weeks. So if you ever apply for Warwick Film and TV and they have a dropout rate of 0.5 now, that was me. So for ages they had 0 and like I had to jump through so many hoops to leave. And they were probably like, you could stay for a year, you could totally stay. I was like, no, I'm gone. So that's my claim to fame, I think. But after that, I studied illustration and animation. It was like quite a traditional route, but it was only like I think on my animation MA that I started thinking about making comics because I can't animate. So and it's just I think on my illustration degree someone told me that I can't write, so I got really stubborn and thought, well, yes, I can, and started. I really enjoy telling stories. I really enjoy drawing, and it seemed a good way to mush everything together.
I feel it's amazing
So-
how much creativity can come out of spite. I feel
Everything I do is out of spite.
sometimes all you need is someone saying you can't do something. It's like, I'll show you.
And I'm really stubborn as well. I'm just like, no, you shouldn't be doing this. I'm like, I am though. So what are you gonna do? So that's kind of like my mishmash way of the way I started making comics. So there we go. How about you, PJ?
That was a nice segue. Well done. You won't need notepads for this, by the way, those of you who've got them. No, like Sarah.
Out of course.
Like Sarah, I actually started out studying film, making film. I went to the University of Glamorgan. I did theatre and film studies there. I directed plays and films, and I didn't realise at that point I wasn't going to be able to do that when I got straight out of uni. I was a naive fool. Got out of uni, started trying to put together some film and theatre projects. None of them were coming together because you're reliant on too many other people to make those things, and too much equipment. It was just not going to happen. And then I don't even remember how or why, but I started adapting one of the film scripts I'd written into a comic script. Because in my naivety, I thought, all you need is an artist. They're easy to find. But then I did find an artist. So, that's why I started writing comics, really, because I wasn't finding success in doing other things. And then I enjoyed it. I found I really enjoyed writing comics. And when you do get an artist who draws something you've written, that's an amazing feeling. Unless they draw it badly. That's. But no, if you get a good artist to draw something you've written and it looks really good, as I have been very lucky to have, Gavin. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So that's why I kept doing it, and that's my very short how I got into comics, I guess.
Oh, it's my turn now. So I didn't do film, unlike these other two. I actually started making comics when I was 16, and I considered that as like the start of it. So I was going to go into A-levels, and I thought, oh, what's going to be something good in my CV? Because, you know, I'm relatively young. The recession was going, we're all like, oh no one has jobs. So I thought, what's going to be cool to put on my CV? Oh, I'll make a comic. So I made a graphic novel. And then I got published by Sweatdrop Studios, who is, they've been around for over a decade now in the UK comic scene, doing like manga. Originally it was like a manga group, and now they're more widely a comic circle. So I got in touch with them, and they very kindly sort of took me on board and basically taught me how to do everything. And it was like a cheat sheet into like how to get into Comic Village, because I was small, I'd never printed anything, and Morag and Sonia sort of told me like, oh, this is what DPI is, this is what, this is how you print stuff, this is what black and white is. No, that's grayscale, Shazleen, stop it, don't do that. So my first comic was a disaster, but then I made another one, and then by the time I graduated last year, I published 4 graphic novels with them. And then now, after graduating, I've been paid to do graphic novel stuff, so I've been very lucky. A lot of the work I've got has been coming from either people I've known, or my university actually helped me to get in to do the comic with the RAF, so they actually set up a big project. A bunch of us were asked to do stuff and do some artwork, which is actually live now. And that was, I think, my first big comic job, and since then I've just been making smaller pieces and collaborating and doing that. Yeah.
Well, I guess in terms of, I mean, we're very interested in your stories, but also I guess we're interested in your stories, like the stories you're telling. So, Shazleen, I mean, any personal projects you're working on, and what are they about?
So this year I've been trying a lot to do professional stuff, but my kind of dream is to go back and do a webcomic at the end of this year. So I'm Bangladeshi, and actually a few of my comics, on and off, I kind of make some personal things in between all the like big side projects. So one that I've made that's also, because a big thing I really care about is getting comics being accessible and having them, readable to people, not really, trying to put a big like price point, because I think a big problem with comics as they're going right now is that they're becoming less accessible to like kids or people from low-income areas, and I'm from a low-income area. So one of my comics that I recently published as sort of a donation webcomic and free to download as a PDF is called Brother. And it's kind of a personal comic about my experience as being like Bangladeshi Muslim and living in this country while a lot of Islamic terror attacks are happening in Europe and in the US. So it's a pretty personal comic. In a less serious note, I'm also trying to do some more personal comics that are narrative pieces, but also look at, diasporic identity and LGBT identity as well, because both of those things apply to me. So I'm trying to make some stories that have brown people being gay and being happy and eating food together, because I don't see them, so I want them, and that's what I care about. Yeah.
Nice. PJ, what do you some story highlights from your career?
I have highlights. I don't. Stiffs is unfinished. That is going to happen at some point. But that was the first one, really, and that was a collaboration written with my housemates at the time, Joe Glass and Drew Davis, and that's where we found Gavin to draw it. But then that was basically based on not the zombies, but based on our lives at the time. It's people in their 20s and 30s stuck in dead-end jobs that they hate, trying to find something else to do. We didn't go and kill undead creatures, but you get the idea. And then Trolltooth Wars, which is the thing I've put out, I think that I'm sort of proudest of and sort of not in this weird. There's a weird relationship between me and that book. Because I bought the rights to it off someone else, because it was a novel based on the Fighting Fantasy series published in the 80s. So I had to buy the rights off Steve Jackson to do that. And there are certain things we can and can't do with it, but so that's been... I mean, I'm very proud of the book. I think I wrote a good script based on the novel. I think, again, Gavin drew it absolutely beautifully. And seeing people enjoy it, because we've had really, really good feedback from people who've read it. They seem to really like it. And that is incredibly gratifying. When someone has an emotional reaction to a book you've put out, do you mind if I tell a little story here about an encounter I had at Cardiff Comic Expo?
I'd be hard pressed to stop you.
So we had a young girl, probably about 12 or 13, approach our table with her father. She picked up Trolltooth Wars, was flicking through it. She said, I really love this. This looks great. Are you the artist? And I said, Gavin was away somewhere. I don't know where he was. I said, no, I wrote it. And her eyes lit up, and she looked at me and went, I'm a writer, and started asking me all these questions about how I'd written it, and was genuinely interested in my answers about the process. And she told me about what she was working on at the time, and her dad just stood there smiling at her, and then he said he was her editor, which I found very amusing anyway. And then after this, we talked for about 10 minutes, and then she bought the book. Well, her dad bought the book for her. But he gave me the money, I gave him the book, signed it for them. Gavin came back and signed it as well. And as she walked away from the table, clutching my comic, I heard her say to her dad, it's my first ever comic. And he went, it's about time. And for someone to be so into it, and to choose my book to be their first comic, that is my favourite experience I've ever had behind a table at a convention, and is the moment I thought, this is why I do this. That moment was just... I've been writing a lot more in terms of speed, how much I've been able to put out since I had that encounter. And I think that's why we do it at the end of the day.
So do you reckon, if we have one really life-affirming moment, maybe every 2 years, that kind of is just enough to kind of keep...
Well, I'll let you know when this one wears off.
In between all the conventions where people throw books at you, and I had a spate of people doing that for a while. So
physically throwing books at you?
Once, and then I had quite a, I had a run of conventions with people just being mean.
Was it your book or someone else's?
My book, my book. So I don't know whether that's better or worse.
So they threw it back at you, or they were signed this, and it just
threw it back at me.
Oh, my.
Yeah, anyway.
Because you did ask me off mic earlier whether it was okay to swear on the panel, and I think I'm seeing why now. That kind of some of that anger.
Now it's my turn. No.
But Sarah, speaking about your books and not throwing them around, do you want to talk about the plot and what you're working on?
Yeah, I think that was a really good point that you said about writing what you want to see.
Yeah.
I always kind of like writing stories that I'd like to read.
Yeah.
So it's always kind of surprising when people are like, I love it.
Yeah. Well, that's why you make it, isn't it? Because that's exactly what you said. Is you make it so that you connect to someone else. And you continue, and I have something to say about that as well.
Because I remember especially through university, a lot of the time they say, you should talk about, what was it, is it spot analysis or something? I can't remember what it was, when you should think about your audience and selling it to a particular person. And I always find that never really works for me, because it's a bit, it always just doesn't feel genuine. It's kind of a thing to apply afterwards, surely. SWOT analysis, that's the word.
Is that an acronym? Does it stand for something?
Don't ask me what it stands for, because I cannot remember.
Okay.
But it's all things like, looking at the type of audience, what are their needs, putting everyone into little boxes, and which I just find as soon as you go to a convention, all of that just goes out the window, because when I wrote NPCT, I kind of thought, well, I wouldn't describe it as such, but I know there are going to be a lot of blokey guys who are going to say this is a comic for girls, and that has just completely gone out the window. It just does not apply at all. Yeah. There are people who are like, oh, pink, this is for girls, right? And you're like, it's for everybody. So, I feel like I've gone off on a million different tangents. What was the question?
The question was... The question, Your Honour, was about what is NPCT about?
It's about
Did I get the
This
letters
is
the
a
wrong way
really-
around there? I
No,
think.
people call it the car park all the time.
Okay.
It's fine. You can call it the car park if you like. But yeah, it sounds really pretentious, but it's kind of about de-escalation and coming back from. I was kind of inspired by people coming back from war and trying to live a normal life. Which sounds really bizarre when you read it because it's about a load of elves and orcs making tea. But yeah, I kind of like to pull in all different things. And there's also stuff about like the Reformation and weird bits about like, you know, how do you talk about magic as if it was religion? And yeah, so I like to pull in lots of different things. So when I write, I kind of write all over the place and somehow it all comes together and people like reading it. So that's kind of my story.
It's like generally the creative process, you know, can either be like a straight arrow, it's like I know what I'm going to do,
Not
or it's
for me
actually
at
just
all.
a lot of screaming and panicking, and then something wonderful emerges from the chaos.
Yeah, for sure. But I know when I wrote, because Heart of Time was my first comic, and I remember showing that at a convention, and there's just all these different things that you just kind of question yourself about. Because I remember at one point, especially in London, looking at it and being like, everything in my comic is white. Why is everything in my comic white? Like, this is wrong. Like, so I specifically went out of my way to just make sure that, because it wasn't even that I wanted inclusion, because that is a big part of it. It's also, this looks boring. My characters look boring. They all look the same. So, yeah, so that was a big thing as well. So, yeah.
Well, Shazleen, you wanted to add something about
Oh,
the
yeah.
kind of audience?
Yeah.
So I want to add to what you just said as well. Yeah, my first comic I ever made, of course, being someone called Shazleen Khan, who's very brown, everyone's white too. And it's a weird thing that you do. And I think it's a weird thing that happens when you're in this country where it's just like, that's what you see. But then it's even worse. I thought it really worse because it dawned on me and I was like, oh. So that leads back to what I was thinking is like, one of my best experiences too is having people, you know, I've recently come out as LGBT, well, I'm pansexual. So I came out publicly kind of recently, so slowly on social media. And since then, I've had a lot of other people like me who are brown, who are Muslim, who are lesbian or otherwise gay or within the community come and reach out to me and be like, it's so good to see you. It's so good to like meet you. It's really, and people who I'd known or like known a little bit had actually opened up more to me or like said things. And that's why you do it as well. Like that's the great thing. And that's why I want to make the comics I want to make, is to reach those people and just kind of have a party with them and like sit and talk to them about the stuff. Yeah.
Really daft question, but have you ever felt like, and this goes to all of you here, but have you ever felt like a celebrity by making comics, be it even in a small circle? Have you ever felt
Not
as if by being a
really.
creator, people have...
No, not for me.
I've been recognised in public. Once.
So you are a celebrity.
No. Once. I was at a gig in Cardiff. I can't remember what gig or why, but it was 2 days after we'd done a signing at a comic shop for Stiffs, and these two guys who were at the signing went, "You wrote Stiffs?" I was like, "Yeah, I did, leave me alone." No, they were weird guys.
Was he brandishing a bottle while he said it? It was like, you
Like raising a fist.
I was drunk and ran away from the bar as quickly as I could. Just like,
But I think like that kind of, I don't want to be recognized.
No, it was so weird.
That's the nice thing about making comics, is like I don't want to be.
I was like, this is supposed to be anonymous. My photo isn't in this book. It's not.
No.
Well, I guess maybe to like clarify, have you ever found that the moment you stepped through the curtain, as it were, and started creating things, do people see you in a different light because of what side of the table you're on?
Yeah, I think so. And it's completely false. Like, you know, people come up and are like, "Oh, you made comics? Oh, you made this all yourself?" And it's like, yes,
And you're
I
like,
also don't go outside and make very little money. You know, this is my baby. I kind of feel like I write fan fiction and you read it. This is weird, you know.
I have
So-
had the behind the table experience of, did you make this? Well, I wrote it. Did you draw it? No. Oh. Thank you.
It's important to know your place.
Yeah, no, again, not actually, because I think I've been doing it since I was 16, so that, like, I'm really young, and it means I've not really had the experience of, like, the other side of it, and, like, even before then, I'd always draw, so that's just, like, my reality, like, oh, I've always been drawing, there's nothing different here, so I don't feel like anyone's treated me any differently, but that's just me, maybe I'm being weird.
Well, I guess like, it's interesting you were saying, like, it's something you've always done.
Yeah.
I guess another question would be, why comics? If that's not too simplistic, because I mean, maybe we all have a desire to create, but why this weird pathway of comics?
Can I answer first?
Of course, yeah.
Because
fine.
like you guys basically summed it up. Because you can do it yourself, and that's basically it. Because you can do it yourself, you don't have to worry about other people. And because it's something that you can do in your bedroom by yourself, and it's just very accessible to do at that level. And that I think has always been it for me. Yeah.
It's intensely personal as well.
Yeah.
Like, you know, as a writer, but then as an artist as well. Like,
Yeah.
I don't feel I could tell my stories in any other way that would be as interesting.
Oh, yeah.
And but it's weird though, because when I got into comics, I was just like, oh, I'll give it a go. And now I'm sitting down, I'm trying to write prose at the moment, and I'm just like, well, I could just draw this. Why am I writing this? You know, it would be so much better if it was drawn, which is another problem.
I think as a writer who emphatically cannot draw, but I think
You drew me a jar of bees, and it was a beautiful jar of bees.
my first ever commission. I got paid £1. As someone who generally has to rely on an artist to get their comic out, I think though the close collaboration you have with an artist when you do a comic, it can be an amazing feeling. I keep bringing him up, but that's because I've worked with him a lot. Gavin, I've worked with him on multiple books, and that is because we work well together, and it's a great feeling. You know, we can bounce off each other. He can draw something different to how I've written it in the script, and I'll go, yeah, all right, that's better, fine. And he can send me something, and I'll go, actually, that's not great, can you change it to this? And again, that's fine, and it's just the two of us collaborating with each other like that is great. If I was doing it in a medium where it would require a lot more people or a chain of people to go through to make these changes, it would just really hamstring the whole thing, and it probably wouldn't be nearly as much fun.
What was your, I mean, I ask why comics. Could you think of like one moment, maybe even in your childhood, that planted that idea of comics? Was there a corrupting influence, if it will?
I think I've talked about this with Vince before, maybe, but it was Dragon Ball for me. I got the Dragon Ball comics when I was I remember sitting in Cardiff Castle Grounds eating a sandwich with my mum, and she'd bought me all these comics from Forbidden Planet that was just manga, really. And when you look over Dragon Ball now, it is totally inappropriate for children. No, seriously.
I read the first
I wanna
volume
read
for the
it.
first
Oh my
time
God.
recently.
Like, I'll find, I
Like because of all
tweeted
the fan
about it.
service and shit, that's it.
I was like,
Yeah.
that's Child Goku's dick, what the hell?
Yeah, but it's like different cultural like standards of it. Like
I picked one up recently, and it was in like, you know,
wanna
a
see
second. I'm going to tweet it out again, because basically, I forget what the name of the pig guy was, but he was basically perving on Bulma.
Oh,
and
no.
He drugged her. He drugged her, and then she fell asleep and was planning on doing awful things to her. I
Okay,
was like,
that's terrible.
This is not appropriate for children.
That's awful. What the?
It was a different time, different country, but that's just
No. See, I was thinking
Still
like,
wrong.
Child Goku's dick. That's fine. He's just like a child and being innocent and free. But that's a different thing.
No, the way they treat Bulma is
That's
horrific.
really bad.
You know, like you kind of imagine there's one phrase you'll never hear once in your life, and then it's suddenly uttered twice within like 5 minutes. Didn't take long. I mean, lofty aspirations.
We set the tone for the summit, though.
Wow, there we go.
But it wasn't so much that aspect of it. I just liked it. But like, I really liked the fact that, because I think at the time as well, like when you went into Forbidden Planet, if you were a teenage girl, a lot of the time you'd be like, oh, there's the manga section, and they'd be a bit like,
Oh.
But at the same time, it was nice reading stories that I kind of felt were written for me and kind of inclusive, especially like with like shoujo manga,
Yeah.
like loads of different, and they were writing different stories,
Yeah.
which I just could not get into with the big two, and then getting into more like image and that kind of thing, and realizing that there is more to comics and there are different ways to draw and different ways that I kind of felt, but this is for me, but maybe not Goku's dick though.
Oh, the triumvirate. There we go. PJ, what was your kind of touchstone?
I've been trying to think about this, and I don't. My earliest memory of reading comics that really sticks with me is when I was really young in the mid-80s. And do you remember the cartoon Mask?
Yeah.
There was a Marvel UK put out a comic of that, which included a lot of UK creators who I've since learned were big names, but at the time I had no idea. I didn't even know people made these things. I thought they just appeared. But I remember each issue I would read multiple times a day, and just even back then I knew that they were doing things that they wouldn't and couldn't do in the actual cartoon that did seem to 5-6 year old me a bit more grown up. And just the idea that they could tell these different stories in these different ways, even if I didn't quite get it at the time, really appealed to me, and I think did stick with me. So that then when I did start reading comics again when I was a bit older, which I think was like a lot of people, the 90s X-Men cartoon, then I picked up an X-Men comic and it snowballed from there. But I think, yeah, that Mask comic is really where I go back to as my major touchstone for loving this format.
Do you still have it?
I don't. I wish I did. I dropped a whole stack of them I had, and I dropped them in a paddling pool.
Oh my god.
and then my dad threw them away. I have been tempted to go on eBay.
We were all quite emotional last weekend.
No, I'm tempted to. I've seen actually Vince. I've seen some of his eBay purchases recently. I think I saw some old Eagles in there. And I remember when Eagle and Mask merged at one point in the 80s. And I've seen some of those, and I'm like, oh, maybe I should start trawling eBay and picking these up.
Shazleen?
So I used to go to Bangladesh a lot as a kid, and also like my mom and my dad grew up like overseas and stuff. And both of them had like Asterix and Tintin as their like stuff. Like my dad had like a whole collection of Tintin apparently as a kid. So, and all my uncles had it, like everyone had like Tintin. So my childhood stories when I would like go to bed in Bangladesh like on holiday, or even when I was younger, like my mom had a book from her brother of Asterix. It was those two, so like French comics, I guess. And then afterwards, a lot of shoujo. All the shoujo in the world. All the Sailor Moon, yes.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Did you, in your head at the time, because I remember I used to really love Tintin,
Yeah.
Tonton and Asterix and all that, but they seemed so different, a world away from the comics, of Marvel, or as I saw in cartoons and stuff. And the crazy thing to me was you could get Tintin in a bookshop, but you had to go to a comic shop to get anything else. Like, did you ever, like, even at that young age, were you aware of like the different platforms or the different ways in which comics were regarded?
I sort of grew up at a time where I think like the comic industry in this country had just sunk, and then there was like not actually a lot of stuff around. So to me, like my entire like knowledge of comics was actually from like animation and cartoons. So like the Spider-Man cartoon, as you said, X-Men, and then also like Asterix had a cartoon at the time. I think Tintin did as well. And my mum has always been like a big fan of comics, so she'd just be like, oh yeah, and Stanley did that, and then she'd just sort of amalgamate everything into like, oh yeah, these are all comics that are things. And I never like really, even as a child, like read like any Marvel comics. I think even now Marvel probably takes up the smallest amount of shelf space, but I always like knew about these things and could never really put them into that context of like, yes, they're like books that you can purchase, or like they come in little issues and floppies that you collect. It was never put in that context for me. Yeah.
Well, I was wondering, and this would go out to all of you now, I was wondering what your thoughts were when you made the fateful decision to get into comics, to start making comics. Did you have any preconceptions about how those comics might see the light of day? Because when I think of like a comic convention and we see a lot of independent creators selling their stuff across the table, is that, and not to make light of it, is that the life you imagined when you thought of making comics? Or did you think, I'm making a comic, it will be in a shop, it will be on a shelf, it will be...
That's difficult, because I think I made half-time as part of my MA course, so that was always kind of like supplementary. It was also a webcomic at the time, and I've discovered since that I just hate publishing webcomics. It just not suit my timetable at all. So I didn't really think about it, to be honest. And I'd never gone to a convention before I sold at my first con. Or I think maybe I went to Cardiff Comic Con, the little tiny size, like the year before, and that was it, with my university. So So I didn't really think about it, which sounds really unprofessional. But I never really had the illusion that I'd be selling floppies in Forbidden Planet or anything like that, because it just, I didn't really see my work fitting in with anything that the big Marvel stuff they've got. But yeah, I don't know. I sound really unprofessional. It's so fun.
Well, it's a similar thing actually. We didn't really think about it with Stiffs, and then we got a break with it that we missed. We missed the boat on, because I did go to a lot of conventions before I started being behind the table at them. And one year while we were in the process of making issue 1 of Stiffs, I had the chance to go to San Diego Comic Con with my cousin. He was exhibiting there and I was just going along to help him out. So I went along and I met C.B. Cebulski and started I don't know why, I was a naive fool, I think, started telling him about Stiffs. And he said, "Oh, that sounds really interesting. Are you going to be at Thought Bubble in Leeds this year? Because I am, and I'd like to see it." And I was like, "I am now!" So Joe Glass, Gavin and I went along to Thought Bubble, showed him what we had of Stiffs, and he really liked it. And he said to us, because we hadn't thought about how we were going to sell it, publish it, anything at that point, we were just making it. And he said to us, "When it's done, let me know. I'll get you in an image." Just said that to us off the basis of the first half an issue we'd showed him. But it took us so long to finish it that by the time we finished, that boat had really, really sailed. And so we just sort of went, "Oh, well, we'll self-publish it then," and book tables at cons without really thinking about it. So yeah, we never considered it really. It just sort of happened that way. That's how we did it. But I would say if you get an opportunity, try not to miss it.
But I mean, the flip side, if that had gone,
Yeah.
if that had come to pass, maybe you wouldn't be here today.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that
I mean,
up,
you'd
John.
probably still be you'd probably still be alive, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I'm actually a lot like Sarah in terms of, like, I went to one convention before I started selling at conventions. I read, I'd pick up books, because this was at the point where, like, you went to Waterstones and you'd get, like, your graphic novel section at that point, and that's where I basically got most of my comics, because I didn't really have a comics community around me before I started making comics aggressively. Everyone I knew who made this kind of stuff was, like, overseas, so I had, like, nothing, and then it suddenly became, like, convention crowd and everyone's making this, so it was, like, a really quick jump. And that, I think, like, seeing it in my first convention sort of made me think, like, oh yeah, I could be like, because I visited the Sweat Drop table, I was like, I could do this, or I could, like, see these other people who are making the stuff. I know about these artist alleys in America, that sounds like a good idea. And it just seemed like, that sounds like a good idea, I'll have a go at it, and now I'm here and doing it.
It's kind of nice actually, because it's like, there's almost like a fearlessness to it, and I don't know whether we could call it because we were really brave, or maybe we just didn't know any better. But I really like
stubbornness.
Yeah,
Sort of, yeah.
I really like the idea that you just kind of just did it, and then kind of worried about what would happen afterwards and how it would actually
I
pan out.
think it helps, and this might be the same for you, Sarah, that my first con behind a table was a small one. It was the first Cardiff Expo. It wasn't a big room, and there weren't a whole load of people. And I think your first con experience behind a table being a small one, and then you sort of progress up. I think if my first one had been an MCM or an LSCC or something, I would have been
My first one
overwhelmed.
was London MCM. That's the only one I ever go to.
Jump in
That's
at the
the
deep
only-
end.
Pardon?
Jump in at the deep end.
Yes. Go
I
hard or
admire
go home. Yeah, it was cool. I mean, I think, like, the first few years I started going to cons, I was, like, really into it and really brave, and now I've had to, like, take a big break from going to them because I'm like, MCM Expo is the only one I do, and it makes me want to cry. I don't even have to travel that far. I live really close, but just because, like, how long it is, how intense it is, and
Do you
how
have
harrowing.
anyone helping you on your table, or is
Well,
it just you?
it's Sweat Drop Studios, so
Okay.
like we're thankfully, because it's a collective, at least 3 people on the
Okay,
table.
good.
So it's usually okay, but it's like a table about 5 times the length of this. So
I think it's interesting, like, even among people who enjoy MCM, and I think I'm one of them, I do
Yeah.
like it as a show, they always describe it as a nightmare. Like, even when it's like, oh yeah, it was a good show, it was a nightmare though. Like, really, really noisy. Like,
It's funny how quickly you change from like, oh, MCM, this is amazing, it's so big and exciting, to like really bitter, like so bitter. Like, you know, we're all like war wounds, like coming out with war wounds, like surviving it, dragging your way out at the end. Like,
have you guys ever seen the zombie horde of like punters come in? So like, as it goes up and then just because over in Comic Village you don't see it, right? And then like once we were near the front because we were going to go buy something and we saw it and it was like, oh Fortuna,
like trying to get food at one point with like yakisoba, like no.
I always remember my very first convention experience behind a table was at the very first London Super Comic Con.
Yeah.
And at the same time there was a Zumba convention going on. And it was
Heard the stories.
And I was a bit self-conscious as well. It was really nice to not be the weirdest people in the room.
I love it when you go into MCM and you see the other cons that are on, because I remember, was it last year or the year before, when they had the massive Christian convention?
What?
Yeah, and they were right by the door, so all the cosplayers had to walk past. And of course, like,
God.
cosplay, you know, like sometimes you don't wear many clothes, that's your choice, it's fine, but the amount, just the clash of, like, of people was amazing. But yeah, like, there's amazing range of conventions they had.
I swear I've been at one point and they had like a military convention, a mother and baby convention, a vaping convention.
Oh my god!
And like a...
Vaping has a convention.
I tell you.
Lifestyle.
If you want to see like the really high quality like stands and like go to the vaping convention.
When's the vaping summit?
Still in the air.
State of vape.
Well, I guess talking about like, it's interesting because you mentioned like jokingly like getting old and jaded and kind of like doing this for a few years. Do you have, and this is a bit of an open question, so I do apologise for it, but do you have an idea of what success or succeeding in comics means to you? Do you think you've reached it? Do you think you'll ever reach it?
Oh, that's a tough question.
It is a tough one, yeah.
I think I've kind of realised what it is over the past couple of years, I think. Because I think when I started, I was like, yeah, this is going to be, I'm going to make money, it's going to be good. And everyone always says, you know, don't go into comics because of the money. And there's always a part of your brain that's like, I'm going to be different. I'm going to make money. It's going to be great. I'll have my first Kickstarter and it'll be amazing. And no. But I think I had like, kind of a bit of a mental health issue, like not massive, but I just realized that I'm quite like a depressed, anxious person, and I kind of came to the conclusion that if I'm making things that I love, if I have like a healthy, happy relationship with my work, and if I'm surrounded by interesting, exciting, lovely people, and also I'm kind of making enough money to get by, that is success for me, 100%. Like not sitting on a yacht thinking about, I've signed with Image, this is great. That's not how comics work.
No.
But, that would be lovely. But at the same time...
PJ, what colour would your yacht have been?
It would have been painted like Optimus Prime. No, I would have had multiple yachts, John, obviously. No, but to go back to your earlier question, success for me would, and I don't think I'm there yet, because I think success for me would mean I wouldn't have to have another full-time job at the same time as I'm making comics. Part-time, fine. I could just drop my hours in the full-time job because I'm earning enough from the comics that I don't need to work that much. That would be success for me.
Shazleen?
I think I agree a lot again with what Sarah said, because yes, that's also how I feel about it. But I also think success is something that molds as you age and continue and progress. Because, right now, I'm not at a stage. I think I am successful for how far I am, but there's still things that I want to achieve. And it is I still live at home because I'm small and because I couldn't get money before this. But I'm close to wanting to move out and paying rent, and I'm very close to be able to do that with a part-time job and with comics, and that's good. And that will be one goal. But then I'm sure there'll be I want to publish a book with a mainstream publisher. That's another goal. So I think success is something that for me is just an ongoing thing until you just cease to exist. So
yeah, I think it's staggered actually. I think once we hit those goals we've set as success now, suddenly that won't be success, and success will be something else that we haven't hit yet.
Yeah.
Do you ever find, like, you think, if I could teleport back in time and say, this is all the stuff I've done, to, like, yourself, either as a child or, like, in uni and stuff, I'd be, like, really excited.
Yeah, no, I would be,
But
yeah.
then day to day, you're kind of like, what am I doing? What am I doing with my life?
I think young me would be, fuck, I got old.
Where was the yacht? Promises were made. Well, I tell you what, do we have any questions for our panellists here today? We're all in a very friendly, safe environment, so the stuff you always wish you could ask at a convention and never had the time or the opportunity.
Okay. Right, picture the scene. You always get people coming to you at conventions and saying, like, how do I do this? What do I do? So you've got a young, hopeful, bright-eyed child who approaches your table, not child goat food, they ask you one piece of advice, what do I not do?
Okay, so this is, what advice would you give a young aspiring creator to not do in making comics?
Don't make a really long event, like millions of issues. Plan
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
story and try it out and see if you like it.
Yeah.
I did a lecture to a university students, and this one guy was just not understanding this concept. He wanted to make a comic, and he was like, yeah, it's going to be 100 issues. And I was just like, I don't think that's a good idea. Have you made a comic before? And he was like, no, but it's going to happen. And he was just so stubborn. And it's like, you don't know until you start making comics. Yeah, he just threw my book in my face, and I cried, and that was the end of that. But yeah, I think just try it out and see if you like it, and just do one small story. Don't get too ambitious. But
I guess mine wouldn't so much be a don't as more of a be prepared to put in a lot more work than maybe you think you will have to. Redraft, you're going to get criticism, take that criticism. You don't have to make the changes that are suggested to you in the criticism, but at least think about them, because they might be coming from a valid place. Be prepared for that. Make sure that you're willing to put the work and put changes in, really.
I'm having a
The hot
struggle.
seat.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that one shouldn't do. I think maybe I agree with yours both again. Set achievable goals. Like, don't. Yeah, it's that. That's the biggest thing that you could do that would mess you up, is not setting achievable goals. And I think, like, I'm sure all of us have been on that table, and you always get that where it's like, I have an idea and it's going to be a million things. I think that is almost the only one that I've ever gotten. It's like, I have an idea and it's a million things. And I had that. I had an idea and it was a million things. So I think that's something that everyone does get approached with. So that is by far the most important thing. Just don't do that. Just do something that's like 4 or 5 pages, and that'll be fine. Or an issue, and that'll be fine.
Also, don't agree to do panels at the last minute.
I personally think you've done very well, PJ. Well, I guess that's one panel down. We've somehow survived. Everyone, if we can have a round of applause for Sarah, Shazleen, and PJ.